Good morning, everybody. It is July 29th, 2026, and the United States Navy just made history in a way that no one in Tehran saw coming, and that is going to change naval warfare permanently. On July 12th, 2026, three 24-foot autonomous drone boats built by a startup company in Austin, Texas, sailed into Bandar Abbas Naval Base, the most important Iranian military port on the Strait of Hormuz, and they ended Iran's submarine arm forever. Not damaged it, ended it. Three Corsair unmanned surface vessels, each costing roughly $1 million, approached a pier where a Ghadar-class midget submarine was suspended in a maintenance hoist, struck the facility, destroyed the hoist mechanism, killed the submarine that was hanging in it, and collapsed the covered maintenance building that was the only remaining infrastructure capable of returning any surviving Iranian submarine to operational status. The entire cost of that mission was around $3 million. The entire Iranian submarine capability that it permanently erased represented decades of investment, billions of dollars in procurement and maintenance, and a strategic asset Iran had been building since the 1990s to threaten the most important shipping lane on Earth. Something that shouldn't exist just wiped out Iran's fleet. And the full story of what the Corsair is, where it came from, what it has done, why it is the most important new weapon system in the American arsenal right now, and what it tells us about the future of every naval fight America will ever have again, that is the story we're going to break down completely today. We are going to cover the full accounting of what has happened to the Iranian Navy from the opening of Operation Epic Fury in February all the way to the Corsair strike in July. We are going to talk about Task Force 59, the Navy's first dedicated unmanned systems unit, and the two historic missions the Corsair executed 34 days apart, one that saved 2 lives and one that ended Iran's submarine program. We are going to get into the startup story behind Saronic Technologies, because the fact that a venture-backed tech company founded by a former Navy SEAL went from prototype to Navy production contract in under 12 months, and then had its product used in combat, is one of the most important stories in defense technology in a generation. We are going to talk about Ukraine's role in proving this concept and the extraordinary irony that Iran helped pioneer sea drone warfare through its Houthi proxies, and is now being hunted by the same concept it helped develop. And then we're going to do the strategic analysis that tells you exactly what a world where the US can produce thousands of these things means for every adversary thinking about contesting American naval power anywhere on Earth. Stay for all of it. Let us get into it. Start with the Corsair itself, because you need to understand what this thing actually is before you can fully appreciate what it just did. The Corsair is a 24-foot diesel-powered autonomous surface vessel, built by Saronic Technologies, headquartered in Austin, Texas. It carries a 1,000-pound payload. It can travel more than 1,000 nautical miles. It moves at more than 35 knots. It costs between $800,000 and $2 million per unit. And it does not need a human operator guiding it in real time, because it processes sensor data at the edge using onboard NVIDIA computing hardware, making navigation and targeting decisions autonomously rather than depending on a data link to a shore-based command center. What that means in practice is that you cannot jam it into inoperation by disrupting its communications. It has its brain on board. It knows where it is going, it recognizes its target, and it executes the mission whether or not anyone is watching from the other end of a radio frequency. The company that built it is not Lockheed Martin. It is not Raytheon. It is not General Dynamics. Saronic Technologies was founded by Rob Lehman and a former Navy SEAL named Dino Mavroukas, and it was founded specifically because of what Ukraine was doing to Russia's Black Sea Fleet. When Ukraine started sinking Russian warships worth hundreds of millions of dollars using drone boats that cost a few $100,000 each, the founders of Saronic looked at that exchange rate and saw the future of naval warfare. A small, fast, cheap, autonomous, expendable platform that could approach a much more expensive target, deliver a lethal payload, and be replaced at a fraction of the cost of what it destroyed. That concept, applied at scale with American engineering sophistication and production capacity, would create an asymmetric capability that no adversary could afford to counter on a one-for-one basis. They built the Corsair, they pitched it to the Navy, and the Navy, to its enormous credit, moved faster than it ever has before. The U.S. Navy awarded Saronic a $392 million production contract in December 2025, moving from prototype to production contract in under 12 months, which is essentially unheard of in a procurement system that normally measures development timelines in decades. Saronic was fielding Corsairs with Task Force 59 in the Middle East by late March 2026. 3 months from contract to combat theater, the company's valuation went from startup to $9 billion, $25 billion after a $600 million Series C and a $1, $75 billion Series D funding round. By May 2026, Saronic had produced at least 300 Corsairs. They are expanding their Franklin, Louisiana shipyard with a $300 million investment, adding more than 300,000 square feet of production capacity and targeting 500 new jobs, aiming for 20 vessels per year initially, with scaling well beyond that. This is not a prototype program. This is a production line that the U.S. military is treating as a foundational capability investment. Before getting to Task Force 59, the production story of the Corsair deserves more detail because it is one of the most remarkable defense acquisition stories in recent memory. The U.S. Navy's traditional procurement cycle, the one that takes 10 to 15 years and hundreds of millions of dollars in development costs before a single production unit is built, was essentially bypassed here. Saronics submitted a proposal, the Navy evaluated it, and a production contract landed in December 2025, 12 months from prototype to production deal. The company then had platforms fielded in the operational theater by late March 2026, 3 months after the contract was signed. Compare that timeline to the F-35 program, which ran for over 2 decades and cost roughly $400 billion before reaching full production. The Corsair got from concept to combat kill in the time it takes most Pentagon programs to finish their initial requirements review. The reason that was possible is that the Navy used another transaction agreement rather than a traditional Federal Acquisition Regulation contract, a procurement pathway that allows the government to move at commercial speed when the technology is mature and the need is urgent. And the technology was already mature because Ukraine had been proving it in actual combat against Russia for 4 years. The Corsair is the American version of something that had already been battle-tested in a real war. The risk was already wrung out. The production pathway was accelerated accordingly. Task Force 59 is the organizational structure that fielded these platforms. And it is worth understanding what it is because it represents a genuinely new way the Navy is incorporating technology. Task Force 59 was established in October 2021 as the U.S. Navy's first unit dedicated entirely to unmanned systems, tasked with experimenting with, testing, and operationalizing new uncrewed and artificial intelligence capabilities into day-to-day naval operations across the Middle East. Unmanned Task Group 59, one, nicknamed the Pioneers, operates under Task Force 59 from Bahrain with a specific mission to stress test unmanned surface vessels and increase maritime domain awareness across the region. The Pioneers have been running surveillance missions in the Gulf, the Red Sea, and the Arabian Sea, building pattern-of-life intelligence on Iranian naval movements, watching IRGC fast attack boat staging areas, and quietly demonstrating that autonomous platforms can operate continuously in the maritime environment in ways that crewed vessels simply cannot. Where a crewed ship needs to return to port, refuel, rest its crew, and cycle through maintenance, an unmanned surface vessel can loiter for days on end with no crew fatigue, no morale issues, no food requirements, no sleep cycles. It watches, it reports, and when the time comes, it can be reconfigured to do exactly what the 3 Corsairs did at Bandar Abbas. The Corsair's first publicly known operational mission was not a strike mission. It was a rescue. On June 8, 2026, 2 U.S. Army soldiers, the crew of an AH-64 Apache helicopter that crashed near the Strait of Hormuz, were in the water waiting for rescue. A Corsair, operating with Task Force 59 under U.S. Naval Forces Central Command, reached them within approximately 2 hours of the crash and recovered both crew members. It was the first publicly confirmed personnel recovery by an unmanned surface vessel in U.S. military history. That mission established something important beyond just the immediate rescue. It established that the Corsair was real, that it was reliable, that it could operate in actual conditions in the actual theater where it was going to be needed, and that its autonomous navigation was good enough to be trusted with the lives of American service members. 34 days later, the same platform went back into that theater on a completely different kind of mission, and it killed a submarine. On the night of July 12, 2026, U.S. Central Command directed 3 Corsair unmanned surface vessels into Bandar Abbas Naval Base on Iran's southern coast. The CENTCOM video that followed is 25 seconds of footage that you can watch and understand immediately without any military background. You see 3 small, low-profile vessels moving across the water at speed toward a pier. You see the distinctive yellow gantry crane that satellite imagery has identified as part of the submarine maintenance infrastructure at Bandar Abbas. Suspended from that gantry is a Ghadir-class midget submarine. The Corsairs approach the target, and then the footage ends. What CENTCOM's statement describes is that the strike hit the submarine and the ship maintenance facility. Open source analysis of the results established that the hoist mechanism, the specific infrastructure used to lift Ghadir-class submarines out of the water for maintenance and repairs, was destroyed. The Ghadir that was hanging in that hoist during the strike was destroyed with it. And the covered maintenance building that transferred submarines from the hoist into the service area had already sustained significant damage from earlier airstrikes, meaning this final Corsair strike removed the last remaining piece of the system that gave Iran any hope of keeping its midget submarine fleet operational. To understand why that matters so profoundly, You need the full accounting of what happened to the Iranian Navy from the moment Operation Epic Fury launched on February 28, 2026, through the Corsair strike in July. The IRGC's naval capability going into this conflict was divided between two forces. The Islamic Republic of Iran Navy operated larger surface combatants, corvettes, frigates, a few submarines, designed for broader maritime operations. The IRGC Navy operated a massive fleet of fast attack craft and missile boats in the shallow, confined waters of the Persian Gulf, built around the concept of swarming and overwhelming larger adversaries through sheer numbers and asymmetric tactics. Both of those forces have been systematically dismantled. In the opening days of Operation Epic Fury, the Iran's Jamaran-class corvette was confirmed sunk at its pier at the Kanarak naval base in Chabahar. The Iran's Makran, a massive former oil tanker that Iran had converted into a mobile, forward-based ship, the kind of vessel that could project Iranian naval power far beyond the strait, was hit at Bandar Abbas and left on fire. In early March, CENTCOM Commander Admiral Brad Cooper confirmed that the United States had sunk Iran's most operational submarine, identified as the Iran's Tareg, a Kilo-class vessel, at its mooring. Two other Kilo-class submarines that had been in dry dock since 2021 undergoing overhaul were struck as well. In a strike that very few people in the public conversation about this conflict are talking about, the Iran's Dana, a Mujj-class corvette in Iran's southern fleet, was sunk by a U.S. submarine near Sri Lanka, killed by a single Mark 48 ADCAP torpedo. Iran had dispatched the Dana on a long-range mission that was supposed to demonstrate Iran's ability to project blue water naval power beyond the Gulf. The U.S. Navy found it near Sri Lanka and sent it to the bottom of the Indian Ocean. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth confirmed the kill. 2 days after the initial Epic Fury strikes began, CENTCOM reported that Iran had 11 ships operating in the Gulf of Oman. Following the strikes, that number was 0. Secretary Hegseth declared the Iranian Navy combat ineffective, and the total of ships damaged or destroyed climbed past 20 major naval vessels, with Admiral Cooper separately reporting that hundreds of IRGC small fast attack craft had been hit at their moorings at Bandar Abbas, Bushehr, and Asaluya. The 16 mine-laying vessels that represented Iran's ability to seed the strait with mines were destroyed. Trump stated the total had exceeded 30 mine layers by mid-March. And then in July, 3 Corsairs finished the job by ending Iran's submarine maintenance capability permanently. There is one more piece of the full naval accounting that deserves specific attention because it did not get the coverage it warranted in the daily flow of news from this conflict. The Iran's Makran story is one of the most strategically significant naval losses Iran has sustained. And most people covering this war have moved past it without fully understanding what it represented. The Makran was a 228-meter converted oil tanker that Iran had re-engineered into a forward-based ship, essentially a mobile logistics and command platform that could project Iranian naval power far beyond the Persian Gulf. Think of it as Iran's version of an expeditionary sea base, capable of carrying fast attack craft on its deck, deploying them in distant waters, and providing fuel, maintenance, and command support to Iranian naval operations far from home ports. Iran had been operating the Makran in the Atlantic and in the Indian Ocean as a demonstration of long-range power projection capability. Satellite imagery confirmed the Makran on fire at its berth in Bandar Abbas in early March 2026, severely damaged by U.S. strikes. Its loss removed Iran's most significant capability to operate naval forces outside the immediate Persian Gulf region. Combined with the sinking of the Iran's Dana near Sri Lanka, the cumulative message to Tehran was unambiguous. There is nowhere on Earth the Iranian Navy can go that is outside the reach of American naval power, and the assets Iran sends beyond the Gulf go there to die. Now, let us talk about the lineage of this weapon and the extraordinary irony at the heart of it, because the history of sea drone warfare involves Iran in a way that should make every IRGC commander very uncomfortable about how this story is being told. The first operational use of a lethal unmanned surface vessel in combat was not by the United States. It was not even by Ukraine. The Houthi rebels in Yemen pioneered kamikaze sea drone attacks in January 2017, striking a Saudi frigate in the Red Sea with an explosive-laden unmanned boat. And those Houthis learned the concept from Iran. Iran had been developing crude kamikaze unmanned surface vessels for years, experimenting with the concept of explosive-laden small boats that could approach a target autonomously or semi-autonomously. They passed that technology and that doctrine to their Houthi proxies in Yemen as part of the broader proxy warfare toolkit. The Houthis used it against Saudi shipping. Then Ukraine watched what the Houthis were doing, studied the concept, and developed the Magura and Sea Baby programs that have been systematically destroying Russia's Black Sea fleet since 2022, pushing Russia's naval assets out of Crimea, sinking warships that cost hundreds of millions of dollars using drones that cost $250,000, proving definitively that the paradigm of large, expensive crude warships being the primary instrument of naval power was broken forever. Saronic watched Ukraine do that and built the Corsair. The US Navy deployed the Corsair to the Middle East. And now Iran is being hunted by the direct conceptual descendant of a weapon Iran itself helped pioneer and spread to its proxy forces. The organization that taught the world the concept of using cheap, expendable sea drones to kill expensive naval assets is now having its most expensive naval assets killed by cheap, expendable sea drones. There is a poetic justice to that sequence that is almost hard to believe. The Ukrainian analogy goes deeper than just demonstrating the concept. Ukraine's Sea Baby and Magura drone boat programs fundamentally changed the strategic balance in the Black Sea, and the parallels to what is now happening in the Strait of Hormuz are direct and instructive. Before Ukraine started using sea drones, Russia's Black Sea fleet operated out of Sevastopol and Crimea with relative impunity, projecting power across the region, launching cruise missile strikes on Ukrainian cities, and enforcing a de facto naval blockade on Ukrainian ports. The fleet was Russia's most visible tool of maritime dominance in that theater. Ukraine, with no meaningful conventional naval force, responded by developing sea drones at commercial speed, deploying them against Russian warships and port infrastructure, and forcing the Russian Black Sea fleet to evacuate Sevastopol entirely. Russia's most capable cruiser, the Moskva, was sunk. Multiple frigates were damaged. Port facilities at Sevastopol were struck repeatedly. The largest navy in the region was forced to operate from ports in Russia proper because the cost of remaining in Crimea became too high. A country with essentially no navy defeated a navy through asymmetric autonomous warfare. Ukraine proved the concept. America refined it. And now Iran is experiencing the result. The cost exchange rate in this story is the thing that should make every military planner in every country with a large conventional navy stop and do the math very carefully. Iran spent decades and billions of dollars building a submarine capability. Kilo-class submarines represent some of the most capable conventionally powered submarines in the world when they are well-maintained and well-crewed. Iran's Ghadir-class midget submarines, while smaller and less capable than the Kilos, represent a genuine asymmetric threat in the shallow, confined waters of the Strait of Hormuz, where their small size and quiet operation make them genuinely difficult to track and engage. Iran invested the kind of national resources that a country of 86 million people with significant oil wealth invests when it decides that underwater naval capability is a strategic priority. And 3 Corsairs, at a combined cost of roughly $3 million, walked into the port where that capability was maintained and ended it. The exchange rate is not 10 to 1. It is not 100 to 1. When you account for the full life cycle cost of the submarine infrastructure that the Corsairs destroyed, the exchange rate is something closer to 1,000 to 1 in America's favor. You cannot fight that economics. You cannot match a platform that costs $1 million with a countermeasure that costs more than $1 million and win the exchange. The only answer is volume. And Saronic is building the capacity to produce thousands of these things, while Iran has no answer at all. Now, here's the honest assessment, because every story like this one requires it. The Iranian Navy's large surface combatants are gone. The submarine arm is functionally ended. But the IRGC's asymmetric naval doctrine does not depend primarily on submarines and frigates. It depends on fast attack craft. Small, fast, missile-armed patrol boats that can swarm and overwhelm in the confined geography of the Persian Gulf. Admiral Cooper reported that hundreds of those have been hit at their moorings, but the IRGC has hundreds of them, and not all have been destroyed. Coastal anti-ship missile batteries, some concealed in terrain that makes them look like ordinary rock formations from aerial surveillance, retain the ability to threaten commercial shipping at close range. Iran still has the geographic advantage of operating in shallow, confined waters where its fast attack craft are most effective. The Iranian naval threat in the Strait has been dramatically, fundamentally, permanently degraded. It has not been reduced to zero, and anyone who tells you otherwise is not giving you the full picture. There's also the mine warfare dimension that Iran retains, and that does not get discussed enough. At the outset of this conflict, Iran had seeded the Strait and surrounding waters with approximately 8,000 naval mines. American mine clearing operations destroyed more than 90% of those by the time Admiral Cooper testified before Congress about the tactical pause. But that means roughly 800 mines may still be out there in various states of functionality, and Iran retains the knowledge, materials, and residual capability to lay more. Naval mines are extraordinarily difficult to counter because they are passive, cheap, and patient. A mine laid in a shipping lane does not need to be operated. It does not need communications. It just sits and waits. Each mine costs a fraction of what mine clearing equipment and operations cost to counter. In the geography of the Strait of Hormuz, where the navigable deep water channel is narrow enough that ships must transit predictable routes, the threat of new mine laying in the choke points remains one of the most serious residual capabilities Iran retains even after everything its navy has lost. CENTCOM has been watching Iran's remaining fast attack craft and small vessels specifically for mine laying behavior. And the intelligence and surveillance architecture, MQ-9 drones watching coastal hideouts 24 hours a day, the Aegis network tracking everything that moves, makes covert mine laying significantly harder than it used to be. But the capability is not zero. But here is what Saranac and Task Force 59 building out a fleet of Corsairs actually means for countering those remaining fast attack craft. The traditional answer to IRGC fast attack boats has been to have crewed naval vessels and aircraft in the area to respond when swarms appear. That requires continuous crewed presence, crew rotation, fuel logistics, and all the overhead that comes with maintaining human beings in a contested maritime environment. A fleet of Corsairs patrolling the strait continuously, feeding ISR data into the network with strike configurations available on demand, creates a different picture entirely. You're not waiting for a crewed vessel to respond. You have autonomous platforms already in the water, already watching, already networked into the operational picture that the Aegis system is providing from the guided missile destroyers. When an IRGC fast attack boat leaves its coastal hideout and moves toward a commercial vessel, you already know about it. You already have something in the water that can respond. The cost of maintaining that persistent presence is a fraction of the cost of maintaining crewed assets in the same role, which means you can have more of it, covering more of the strait for longer. That is what the Corsair fleet ultimately enables. Not just individual strike missions, but the kind of persistent, omnipresent autonomous coverage of a contested waterway that makes the IRGC's asymmetric tactics essentially unexecutable at scale. There's also the China dimension to this story, and it is one that should be part of every analysis of what is happening in the Strait of Hormuz, because the people watching most carefully from the outside are not in Tehran. They are in Beijing. China has the world's largest navy by number of hulls. It has been building aircraft carriers, guided missile destroyers, cruisers, and submarines at a rate that has consistently surprised Western analysts. It has been constructing the traditional instruments of great power naval dominance. And now Beijing is watching the Corsair destroy Iran's submarine infrastructure for $3 million. It is watching Ukrainian Magura drones sink Russian warships that cost hundreds of millions. It is watching the entire concept of large, expensive, crewed naval platforms as the primary instrument of maritime power being challenged in two different theaters simultaneously. China's military planners understand the exchange rate mathematics. They understand what it means for the United States to have a company capable of producing thousands of autonomous surface vessels per year. A Taiwan Strait scenario does not just involve Chinese destroyers and submarines versus American carriers and guided missile destroyers. It now involves a potential fleet of Corsairs, or Corsair successors, operating as a persistent autonomous layer across the most contested maritime geography in the world. That changes the calculation in ways that Chinese defense planners are actively working through right now, and they are not finding comfortable answers. One more dimension needs to be added to the China analysis before the full strategic picture comes together. The Pentagon did not wait for the Corsair's combat debut to start planning the next generation. On July 1st, 2026, Defense Secretary Hegseth signed a memorandum establishing a direct reporting portfolio manager for unmanned systems, essentially creating a joint unmanned systems czar at the departmental level with directive authority over drone programs across all the military services. That office reports directly to the Deputy Secretary of Defense. What that means is that every lesson being learned in the Strait of Hormuz in real time is being captured, analyzed, and fed into the acquisition and doctrine decisions for future unmanned maritime systems that will be relevant to the Pacific theater. The Corsair's combat record in Iran is not just an Iran story. It is the research and development phase for what the U.S. military intends to field against Chinese naval assets in the next decade. Every engagement, every autonomous decision the Corsair made at Bandar Abbas, every piece of performance data from the strike and from the earlier rescue mission feeds into the systems that will be operating in the South China Sea when and if that conflict ever materializes. Saronic co-founder Rob Lehman said after the Bandar Abbas strike that its success would reverberate across the entire USV industry. He is right, but more specifically, it will reverberate in every boardroom in Beijing where military planners are sitting down and doing the math on what defending Taiwan costs when your opponent has an autonomous surface vessel that costs $1 million and can be produced at industrial scale. Here is the 40 chess strategic analysis. The Iranian Navy went into the 2026 conflict as the primary instrument of one of the most sophisticated asymmetric naval strategies in the world. The IRGC's combination of fast attack craft, coastal missiles, mines, submarines, and the natural choke point geography of the Strait of Hormuz had been optimized for decades, specifically to deter and, if necessary, inflict catastrophic losses on a numerically superior conventional naval force. That strategy was built on the assumption that the cost of entering the strait in force would be prohibitive. The Corsair and the broader unmanned naval capability it represents has exposed the fundamental flaw in that assumption. The assumption was that conventional naval power was the adversary's main vulnerability, that sinking a carrier or a guided missile destroyer would impose unacceptable costs. What the Corsair demonstrates is that the US military does not need to send its most expensive assets into the most dangerous place. It sends something that costs $1 million into the most dangerous place, watches what happens from a safe distance, and if that $1 million platform is lost, it gets replaced. The economic asymmetry that Iran's strategy was supposed to exploit has been turned inside out. The Corsair strike at Bandar Abbas on July 12th was more than a tactical victory. It was a proof of concept that will define how the US Navy fights for the next generation. A startup company founded because of what Ukraine did to Russia's Black Sea fleet, funded by venture capital that moved at startup speed, built a platform that moved from prototype to production to combat in under 18 months, and then destroyed the submarine maintenance capability of a nation that had been building that capability for 30 years. Something that shouldn't exist just ended Iran's fleet. And it is telling every adversary watching that the next time they build a fleet, they should probably think about what 1,000 Corsairs would do to it before they start. The free people of Iran deserve acknowledgement in this conversation too, because the destruction of the IRGC's naval infrastructure is not a loss for the Iranian people. The IRGC Navy was never a defensive force protecting Iranian citizens from external threats. It was an extortion apparatus that extracted revenue from international shipping, an offensive force that attacked commercial vessels and killed sailors, and an instrument of the regime's power projection that served the IRGC's institutional interests above the interests of the population that funds it through confiscated oil wealth. Every Jamaran corvette on the bottom of the Gulf of Oman, every Ghadir submarine that will never sail again, every fast attack boat hit at its mooring at Bandar Abbas represents the end of a weapon that was pointed not at Iran's enemies, but at the world's commerce, and by extension, at the economic futures of ordinary Iranian people who will never see a penny of what those weapons cost to build. So what do you think? Does the Corsair strike represent the decisive turning point in the Strait of Hormuz fight, or does Iran still have enough asymmetric capability left to remain a serious maritime threat? And now that the US has demonstrated this combat capability in the Middle East, what does that mean for Taiwan and the South China Sea as Beijing watches all of this and makes its calculations? Drop your thoughts in the comments because this conversation is one of the most important strategic discussions happening right now. If this breakdown gave you the full picture that the headline alone does not provide, share it with someone who needs to understand what is actually happening in naval warfare right now. Hit subscribe so you do not miss a single update. The story of autonomous naval warfare is just getting started, and we are going to be right on top of every development. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. We will see you in the next one.